The night was unusually quiet when I found myself standing inside an old museum long after closing hours. The dim lights cast shadows across the ancient artifacts, each one holding a story that someone, somewhere, had written down as truth. But as I looked at a cracked clay tablet from thousands of years ago, one question kept echoing through my mind. What if history, our history, isn't always true? What if some parts were exaggerated, misunderstood, or reshaped by the people powerful enough to write them? And more importantly, how many of those stories have we accepted without ever asking who wrote them and why? That single thought is what pulls us into this journey tonight. A journey where we don't disrespect history, but examine it. We dig into the myth that every historical fact is carved in stone. We explore how memory, politics, culture, science, and even human emotion can distort events over time. Because the truth is, history is not just a record of what happened. Sometimes it's a record of what someone wanted you to believe happened. And once you realize that, you never look at the past or the present the same way again. As I walked deeper into the museum, I imagined the scribes who sat thousands of years ago with small candles flickering beside them, writing stories about kings, wars, victories, and legends. Not a single one of them knew a future audience would read their work as objective truth. They were simply people, just like us, people with fears, loyalties, responsibilities, and sometimes agendas. Some wrote to honor their rulers, some wrote to protect their own villages, some wrote because that was the only way to survive another day. And yet their words became the backbone of how we understand entire civilizations today. The deeper I wandered, the more I felt something unsettling. If memory can change within a family over a single generation, how much can it change over centuries? Have you ever heard two siblings argue about the same childhood event? Each completely sure their version is correct. That's because memory isn't a camera, it's a storyteller. It edits, reshapes, and sometimes even fills gaps on its own. Now imagine that same flawed memory being passed from one person to another, from one generation to the next. Imagine it being influenced by culture, pride, trauma, or fear. And then imagine someone finally writing it down, declaring it fact. This isn't conspiracy, this is human psychology. Neuroscientists have proven that memory is reconstructed each time we recall it, not replayed. So when oral traditions lasted hundreds of years before becoming written chronicles, the stories would naturally evolve, just like a message in a game of telephone, but stretched across centuries. One of the earliest examples of this is the story of ancient battles. In many ancient texts, leaders wrote about winning wars that archaeologists now know they actually lost. Sometimes they exaggerated the size of enemy armies to make their victory seem more heroic. In other cases, they hid their failures to maintain power. Ancient Egypt, for instance, left behind inscriptions describing great victories, even during battles where the results were much more complicated. Archaeologists studying ruins and weapon fragments later pieced together a far more nuanced story, one that didn't always match the proud carvings on the temple walls. This doesn't make the people of the past manipulative villains. It makes them human. People throughout history believed in honor, legacy, and pride. A king didn't want to be remembered as a man who lost. A tribe didn't want its children to think their ancestors were weak. So they shaped their stories, sometimes intentionally, sometimes unknowingly, to fit the world they wished existed. As the story unfolds, we travel now to a place far from the museum, an old European library with a wooden staircase curling toward the ceiling. Here, countless manuscripts rest quietly behind glass. Some of them contain the earliest written histories of empires. But what many people don't realize is that these weren't the first versions of those stories. They were simply the first surviving versions. For thousands of years, earlier writings have been lost to fire, war, decay, or political censorship. So the history we read today is often based on the survivors, not the originals. And survival itself can be biased. For example, during the Middle Ages, certain records were copied repeatedly because they supported the beliefs of the authorities. Others were quietly abandoned, left to rot, or deliberately destroyed. When an empire changed rulers, the new ruler sometimes rewrote the achievements of the previous one. In some cultures, it was not unusual to erase the name of a former leader from monuments, as if removing their name removed their existence. Knowing this, it becomes clear that history isn't just about what happened. It's also about what was allowed to be preserved. As we explore deeper, I want you to imagine a historian sitting in the present day, surrounded by fragments of information. A broken statue, a half-burned scroll, a mismatched set of pottery. From these pieces, they construct the best possible narrative. But it's exactly that, a narrative. A thoughtful, educated story built on the evidence available. And sometimes new discoveries flip entire understandings upside down. It's not that historians were wrong, it's that the puzzle pieces changed. Think about how many times archaeology has rewritten the past. Civilizations believed to be primitive were found to have advanced engineering. Empires thought to be peaceful were discovered to have engaged in extensive warfare. Events once called myths became historical facts, like the ancient city of Troy, which for centuries was thought to be nothing more than a legend until ruins were discovered, confirming its existence. On the flip side, events once accepted as literal truth were revealed to be misunderstandings or exaggerations. It's not just ancient history either. Even recent events we have photographs and video for, can still be misinterpreted. Two news channels can show the same footage and tell completely different stories. People can remember the same political event in totally different ways depending on their environment. When you apply this lens to thousands of years of human civilization, you begin to understand why asking questions isn't disrespectful, it's necessary. One of the most powerful examples comes from historians who study royal courts. In many empires, the only people allowed to write history were scribes working under the king. Naturally, their work favored their employer. They highlighted victories, justified decisions, and sometimes even omitted entire truths. Many people of lower classes or defeated groups never had the opportunity to record their side of the story. Their voices were lost, leaving behind an incomplete picture that gets polished into textbooks today. And in that silence, myths are born. But here's the interesting part. Questioning history doesn't weaken it, it strengthens it. Science works the same way. When new data appears, theories are updated, not discarded. History requires the same openness. When archaeologists discover new ruins, or carbon dating reveals new timelines, or old documents are translated with modern tools, our understanding evolves. That doesn't mean everything we believed before was wrong. It means we're getting closer to the full picture. Now imagine a story within this story. A small village in the mountains with a legend passed down for 500 years. The villagers believe their ancestors defeated a giant invader. The tale became a symbol of pride, celebrated every year in festivals. But one day, archaeologists discover old bones and realize the giant invader was actually a misinterpreted animal species
that went extinct long ago. The villagers aren't angry, they smile, because the legend gave their ancestors identity and strength. It wasn't meant to deceive, it was meant to inspire. That's when the true meaning of history becomes clear. It's not always about the literal truth. It's about how people understood the world at the time. But history can also be shaped intentionally. Sometimes rulers used stories to unite people, sometimes to divide them, sometimes to justify decisions, and sometimes simply to maintain order. Not all of it was malicious. Often it was practical. If you lived in a time of chaos and fear, strong stories helped create stability. They gave people something to believe in. That's why